Hey guys, tonight we're stepping away from the grand histories of kings and empires and venturing into a world lit only by firelight and fear. We're journeying to a time when a neighbor's sudden misfortune could become your death sentence, when a whispered accusation in the market square held more power than a judge's gavel. This is the story of the great witch hunts, a descent into an age of profound faith and even more profound terror. We will explore not just the hysteria, but the mechanics of cruelty, the strange, systematic, and often bizarre punishments designed to purify a world that saw the devil lurking in every shadow. If this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. So get comfortable. Let the world settle around you. Now, dim the lights, and let's listen to the whispers from that long, dark night. Before the first fire was lit, you have to understand the world that built it. Picture a time before science, before electricity, before the world was explained by anything other than divine will. Life in the 15th and 16th centuries was fragile, a brief and often brutal affair. Winters were colder, harvests failed for reasons no one understood, and sickness could steal a child in the night without warning or remedy. The Black Death was not a distant memory. Its shadow still lingered over Europe, a testament to how quickly the world could be plunged into chaos. In this world, faith was the only anchor. The church was not just a building in the village, it was the center of the universe, the sole interpreter of life and death. And its central story was one of cosmic war, the eternal struggle between God and Satan. This wasn't an abstract idea. They believed this war was fought every day, not in some distant heaven, but right here on earth, in their fields, in their homes. A sudden, violent hailstorm that flattened the wheat wasn't just bad weather, it was the devil's mischief. A cow that stopped giving milk wasn't just ill, it was cursed. A baby born with a defect wasn't a tragedy of nature, it was a sign of demonic influence. When life is a constant, desperate struggle for survival, misfortune feels personal. It feels targeted. And in a world that believes in active, malevolent evil, the next question is not what happened, but who made it happen. People needed a cause, a face to put to their fear. They needed a reason for their suffering, and increasingly, they were taught to look for it in their neighbors. They were taught to look for the witch. For centuries, the belief in witches was a scattered, local affair, a thing of folklore and village superstition. But in 1487, two German inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, created a tool that would turn these scattered fears into a systematic, brutal machine. They published a book called the Malleus Maleficarum in English, The Hammer of Witches. It was not a book of spells or stories. It was a terrifyingly detailed, clinical, and legalistic manual on how to find, prosecute, and destroy witches. And with the recent invention of the printing press, it spread like wildfire. The Malleus Maleficarum was, in its own way, a masterpiece of propaganda. It laid out its arguments with chilling certainty. First, it declared that to not believe in witchcraft was itself a form of heresy, a direct defiance of God. It answered every possible doubt with scripture and theological reasoning. Second, it obsessively argued that women were far more susceptible to the devil's temptations than men, citing their supposed lust, weak minds, and natural deceitfulness. It turned misogyny into a divine mandate. Most importantly, the book was a practical guide. It described in lurid detail the supposed pacts witches made with the devil, the Sabbaths they attended, and the ways they cast their malevolent spells. And then, it provided the blueprint for their eradication. It gave magistrates a list of questions to ask. It recommended specific methods of torture to secure a confession. It explained how to interpret every word, every tear, and every silence as proof of guilt. The Malleus Maleficarum gave the authority of the Church and the weight of the law to the darkest fears of the common person. It wasn't just a book. It was a license to kill. So how did it begin? Not with a shadowy figure cackling over a cauldron. It almost always began with something small, something human. Imagine a small, walled town or a wind-swept village, a place where everyone knows your name, your business, and your secrets. In a place this small, resentments simmer for years. The first spark of an accusation was almost never about devil worship. It was about life. A dispute over a property line. A bitter word exchanged between two women at the market. A loan that was never repaid. A midwife whose herbal remedies failed to save a sick infant. Or perhaps it was just a lingering unease about the woman at the edge of the village, the widow who lived alone, who spoke her mind too freely, whose cat seemed a little too intelligent. This private grudge or public suspicion would lie dormant, waiting for a catalyst. And the catalyst was always misfortune. A farmer's prize pig suddenly dies. A batch of beer turns inexplicably sour. A young man, spurned by a village girl, falls into a deep depression. In a world primed by the Malleus Maleficarum, these were not accidents. They were acts of maleficium, of magical harm. The whisper starts. It happened right after I argued with old Marjorie. The whisper finds fertile ground in the fear of others. Soon, the rumor solidifies into a story, and the story becomes an accepted truth. The community, desperate for an answer to their suffering, finds a target, and once the town's fear had a name, it was only a matter of time before that name was spoken to the local magistrate. The informal accusation was about to become a formal one. The path to the pyre began with a single, poisoned word. For the accused, it would have started as just another ordinary day, filled with the endless chores of a hard life, mending clothes, tending the fire, kneading bread. But then comes the sound that cuts through the routine. Not a friendly call from a neighbor, but heavy, purposeful footsteps stopping outside the door. And then, the knock. A hard, official rap that chills the blood. Opening the door, you wouldn't see a mob with torches. Not at first. You'd see the grim, familiar faces of the town constable and perhaps a priest. Behind them, you might see your neighbors, the ones you shared bread with yesterday, their faces now a mixture of fear, righteousness, and a chilling curiosity. There are no questions, only a statement. You are accused. You must come. The journey from your home was the first stage of the punishment. It was a walk of shame, a public stripping of your identity. You were no longer a wife, a mother, a daughter. You were now simply the witch. Your children might be crying, your husband standing helpless, because to defend you now is to risk being accused alongside you. The social fabric that once supported you has torn away, leaving you utterly alone. Your destination was not a prison in the modern sense. It was a castle dungeon, the cellar of a town hall, or a purpose-built witch tower. And as the heavy oak door slammed shut behind you, plunging you into darkness, the true horror would begin to sink in. The cold stone, the damp straw, the clank of chains on the wall. The only sound is the drip of water and the frantic beating of your own heart. Here in this forgotten place, you would wait. You would wait for the questioning to begin. After days, or perhaps weeks, in the suffocating darkness of your cell, the door finally creaks open. But it is not liberation that awaits you. It is the beginning of the formal process, the first step in a long, methodical journey designed to prove what your accusers already believe to be true. You are led from your cell, blinking in the torchlight, not to a courtroom, but to a bare, cold chamber. Here, the first ritual of your unmaking will take place. You are ordered to remove your clothes, all of them. As the cold air raises goosebumps on your skin, another figure enters, a man with a grim, practiced expression, who begins to shave every hair from your body, your head, your arms, everywhere. This is not for hygiene. It is for scrutiny. The devil, they believe, is clever. He could hide his mark under a single strand of hair, or in a hidden fold of skin. This shaving is an act of profound humiliation, designed to strip you of your identity, to render you a blank, trembling canvas upon which they can find the evidence they seek. The central belief was this: when you made your pact with Satan, he sealed it with a mark upon your flesh. This was the devil's mark. It could be a mole, a wart, a birthmark, a small scar, or any unusual blemish. And this spot, it was said, was dead to the world. It would not bleed if pricked, and you would feel no pain. Your own body, with its lifetime of small, normal imperfections, was now an atlas of potential guilt. This is where the specialist was called in. He was known as the witch pricker, a man who often traveled from town to town, his services in high demand. He carried the tools of his trade, a set of long, sharp needles and bodkins. His job was to conduct the search. With you held down, naked and exposed before the eyes of the magistrates, the pricker would begin his work. Slowly, methodically, he would poke and prod every inch of your skin, your back, your arms, the soles of your feet. Each jab of the needle was a question. Do you feel this? Do you bleed? The pain and the shame were overwhelming. But the true horror of the pricking lay in its inherent deception. The witch pricker's test was one you could not possibly pass. If you cried out in pain at every prick, you could be accused of faking it, of using demonic power to hide the true, painless spot. If you stoically endured the pain without flinching, your silence was taken as proof that the needle had found the mark. And many of these prickers were charlatans. They employed trick needles with retractable points that would slide back into the handle, giving the appearance of deep penetration without actually breaking the skin. The pricker could choose any spot on your body, press his fake needle against it, and declare to the court that you felt nothing and shed no blood. It was a piece of theater, a gruesome magic trick with your life as the price. Imagine the suffocating powerlessness of that moment. The cold of the room, the stares of your accusers, the sharp, repeated sting of the needle, and the chilling realization that the outcome was already decided. Your body is no longer your own. It is a text being read by your enemies, and they will find the damning passages they are looking for. And then the pricker stops. He pulls back his needle from a mole on your shoulder. He announces, with grim satisfaction, "Here, No blood, no pain. The magistrates nod slowly. The first piece of physical, irrefutable evidence has been found. Your guilt is no longer a matter of mere accusation. It is now written upon your very skin. Sometimes, the discovery of a physical mark was not enough. Sometimes, the magistrates and clergy sought a higher form of proof, a direct judgment not from man, but from God Himself. For this, they turned to an ancient practice, dredged up from a darker past, the ordeal. And for accused witches, the most common form was the ordeal by water, a ritual as poetic in its logic as it was inescapable in its cruelty. The theology was simple and devastating. Water, the element of creation and the holy vessel of baptism, was pure. It was God's element. As such, it would naturally reject anything profane, anything touched by the devil. An innocent soul, being pure, would be accepted by the water. They would sink. A witch, having renounced her baptism and sworn allegiance to Satan, would be repelled by the sacred liquid. She would float. It was a perfect, self-proving system, a divine catch-22 from which there was no escape. Imagine being led from your dark cell out into the blinding light of day. A crowd follows as you are marched not to the gallows, but to the edge of a still, cold pond or a slow-moving river. The air is tense with anticipation. The priest makes the sign of the cross over the water, blessing it, sanctifying it for the test to come. You are not simply bound by the wrists. Often, they would tie your right thumb to your left big toe, and your left thumb to your right, folding your body into a helpless, contorted position, making any attempt to swim impossible. You are now a parcel of flesh, ready to be delivered to God for judgment. A rope is tied around your waist, the other end held by a man on the bank. Then, with a rough shove, you are cast into the freezing water. The shock of the cold steals your breath. Your heavy wool clothes become instantly waterlogged, pulling you down. Panic seizes you as you sink into the murky, green silence, the sounds of the world above becoming a distant, muffled hum. And here, in this terrifying, breathless moment, your fate is decided. If you sink, the crowd on the bank watches the bubbles cease. You have been accepted by the water. You are declared innocent. But the declaration often comes too late. The men holding the rope begin to pull, but their efforts can be clumsy, slow. They haul your limp, blue body back to the shore. You are innocent, yes, but you are also dead, a victim of the very test that exonerated you. Your family is left to mourn a soul proven pure only in its final, suffocating moments. But what if you float? What if the air trapped in your skirts, or the simple physics of your body, keep you bobbing on the surface? A desperate gasp for air, your head breaking the surface, is not seen as a natural struggle for life. It is seen as the verdict. The holy water has rejected you. You are a witch. A murmur ripples through the crowd, a grim, satisfied nod. God Himself has pointed the finger. You are pulled from the water, shivering, gasping, but alive. Yet your survival is your damnation. You have not escaped your fate. You have merely sealed it. You are dragged back to your cell, no longer just an accused witch, but a proven one, ready for the final punishment that awaits. The swimming test was a theater of despair, a ritual from which the only exit was death. You could die innocent, or you could live. for a little while longer, as the guilty. For those who floated, or for whom the pricker's needle was not deemed sufficient, the inquisitors turned to methods that attacked not just the body, but the mind itself. The physical wounds of the rack or the strappado might heal, but a shattered mind was a permanent prison. Of all the psychological tortures, the most insidiously simple and the most effective was a process known as tormentum insomnia, the torture of sleeplessness. In England, it was simply called waking the witch. The logic behind it was, like all things in the witch hunt, a twisted reflection of their worldview. A witch, they believed, drew her power from the demonic spirits, her familiars, who visited her in the quiet of the night. It was in these secret hours that she received her orders and replenished her malevolent energy. To break the witch, you had to sever this connection. You had to deny her the sanctuary of sleep. You are dragged from your cell once more and placed in the center of a room. This time, there are no complex instruments, no racks or screws. The tools are far simpler, a hard wooden stool, and a handful of men who will serve as your keepers. Your ordeal is to remain awake. It sounds simple, almost benign compared to the threat of fire or iron, but this belies its profound cruelty. The first day is a trial of endurance. You are forced to sit upright on the backless stool, or more often, forced to walk endlessly back and forth across the cold stone floor of your cell. You cannot rest. You cannot lean against a wall. Every time your eyelids begin to droop, every time your pace slows, you are sharply prodded with a stick or a bodkin. Your keepers work in shifts, ensuring that they are always fresh, always vigilant. There is no day or night, only a continuous, monotonous present. By the second day, your body is screaming. Your feet are swollen and raw from the constant walking. Your muscles ache with a deep, burning fire. A thick fog begins to fill your mind. Thoughts become disjointed, slipping away before you can fully grasp them. The faces of your keepers begin to warp and distort in the flickering torchlight. Was that a sneer? A flash of horns, the line between the real and the imagined begins to fray. By the third or fourth day, your mind begins to revolt. The world dissolves into a waking nightmare. You start to see things that are not there, spiders crawling on the walls, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the room. You hear whispers, the disembodied voices of your accusers, or perhaps the pleading of your own children. Memory collapses. You can no longer remember what you are accused of, what you said an hour ago, or even who you are. Your entire being is consumed by a single, all-powerful desire, the desire for sleep. It is a thirst more profound than any thirst for water, a hunger more desperate than any hunger for food. This is the moment your interrogators have been waiting for. They enter your cell. Their voices calm and reasonable in the midst of your personal chaos. Just confess, they say, their tone almost gentle. Confess, and you can sleep. The word sleep is a promise of paradise, a release so beautiful and so potent that you would do anything to attain it. So you begin to talk. The words spill out of you, a torrent of nonsense and confession. Yes, you danced with the devil. Yes, you soured the milk. Yes, you flew on a broomstick and cursed your neighbor's child. You agree to everything they suggest, embroidering the tales with details drawn from the fever swamp of your own broken mind. You are not confessing to a crime. You are reciting the words that will purchase you the oblivion of unconsciousness. The scribe writes it all down, every fantastical detail. The magistrates nod, satisfied. They see this not as a forced confession from a tortured mind, but as the devil, weakened by their holy vigilance, finally being forced to speak the truth through your lips. You are led away, not to a bed, but back to your straw-strewn cell. And as you collapse into a profound, bottomless slumber, you do so as a condemned witch. Your own words, born of madness and exhaustion, having become your death warrant. They did not break your bones to get their confession. They simply unraveled your mind, thread by painful thread. When psychological torment failed to produce the desired confession, or when the authorities wished to extract the names of other supposed witches, they turned from the subtle to the visceral. They turned to machines of calibrated, mechanical pain. Among the most feared of these devices were the instruments of crushing the leg boots and the thumb screws. These were not tools of swift violence, but of slow, methodical, and unbearable pressure. Imagine being brought once again to the interrogation chamber. This time, your legs are placed into a device that looks like a pair of oversized wooden or metal boots. The device, sometimes called a Spanish boot, fits snugly around your calves, from ankle to knee. It is not the boot itself that is the source of terror, but the small wooden or metal wedges that the executioner holds in his hand. The questioning begins. Who was with you at the Sabbath? You refuse to answer, or you insist there was no Sabbath. The interrogator nods to the torturer. He takes the first wedge, places it between the casing of the boot and your flesh, and with a sharp rap of a mallet, drives it firmly into place. A jolt of pain, deep and jarring, shoots up your leg. It is not a sharp cut, but a deep, compressive agony, as if your very bone is being squeezed. They ask again. You were seen flying over the churchyard. Confess it. Again you deny it, your voice trembling. The torturer takes another wedge and hammers it in beside the first. The pressure intensifies, growing from a painful ache into a white-hot, searing torment. The boot tightens. The space for your flesh and bone disappears. You can feel the muscles tearing, the skin splitting. They continue this dreadful rhythm of question and pain. Another wedge, and another. The boots could have room for 4, 5, sometimes as many as 8 wedges on each side. With each blow of the mallet, the pressure becomes more excruciating, moving beyond pain into a sickening sensation of your lower legs being irrevocably destroyed. The ultimate goal was not just to cause pain, but to shatter the shin bones completely. The sound of your own bones cracking under the pressure was often the sound that finally broke your will. The thumbscrews, or pillywinks, were a smaller, but no less terrifying, application of the same principle. It was a simple vise, a metal clamp into which your thumbs, and sometimes your fingers and even toes, were placed. The device was small enough for an interrogator to hold in one hand while he posed his questions. As you deny the charges, he begins to slowly turn the screw. The metal bars press down on your nail beds, a point of exquisite sensitivity. The initial pressure is intensely painful, but it is the slowness of the process that is so horrifying. You can see the screw turning. You can feel the pressure building, bit by bit. It is a pain you can anticipate, but are powerless to stop. The screw continues its slow turn. the metal grinding into your flesh, pushing the nail into the nerve. And then comes the sound, a small, wet crunch as the bone of your thumb begins to splinter and flatten under the force. The pain is blinding, a universe of pure agony contained in the smallest part of your body. They would move from the thumbs to the index fingers, methodically crushing each one until you gave them the answers they wanted. A confession obtained under the thumbscrews was not a product of guilt. It was a desperate bargain for the hope that some small part of your hands might be saved from ruin. These tools were instruments of deconstruction. They took a human body and, with the simple mechanics of the screw and the wedge, they slowly and deliberately unmade it. They left their victims crippled and maimed for life, a life that was, in any case, almost certainly forfeit. The confession you gave, as your bones were being shattered, was simply the final formality before the fire. When the slow, grinding pressure of the boot or the screw was not enough, the inquisitors employed a different kind of physics to break their victims. They turned to the brutal, elegant simplicity of the rope and pulley. This torture, known as the strappado, did not crush the body. It tore it apart using its own weight as the weapon. It was a punishment of wrenching, tearing, and dislocation, a vertical agony that left its survivors permanently broken. You are led into a chamber with a high, vaulted ceiling. From a thick wooden beam above hangs a single rope threaded through a squeaking metal pulley. The purpose of this device is not immediately obvious, but a cold dread begins to settle in your stomach. Your hands are pulled behind your back, the rope binding your wrist so tightly that your circulation is cut off. This in itself is painful, forcing your shoulders into an unnatural backward arch. The other end of the rope is then thrown over the pulley, and the torturer's assistants begin to pull. Slowly, your feet leave the floor. At first, the strain is manageable, but with every inch you are hoisted higher. Your entire body weight begins to hang from your shoulder sockets. A sharp, searing pain ignites in your joints. Your muscles, already stretched to their limit, begin to tremble and scream in protest. You are a human pendulum, suspended in a state of ever-increasing torment. From this position, dangling helplessly in the air, the questioning would begin. But the true horror of the strappado was not the hanging. It was the drop. After a few moments of this agonizing suspension, the torturer would give a signal. The rope would be suddenly released, and you would plummet towards the stone floor. But not all the way. Just before you hit the ground, the rope would be jerked taut with a violent, bone-shattering snap. The force of this sudden stop was catastrophic. All of your falling body's momentum would be transferred directly into your already strained shoulder joints. The sound was unmistakable, a sickening, wet series of pops and cracks as both of your arms were violently ripped from their sockets. The pain was absolute, a blinding, white-hot explosion that erased all thought, all reason. Many fainted instantly from the shock. For those who remained conscious, the ordeal continued. You would be left hanging there, your arms now useless, dislocated things, held to your body only by torn ligaments and skin. Breathing becomes a shallow, desperate struggle, as the position of your ruined arms compresses your chest. In this state of unimaginable pain and helplessness, the voice of the interrogator would cut through the haze. Will you confess now? Shall we do it again? And they often did. They could hoist you up and drop you repeatedly. Each time, the damage would be more severe, the pain more profound. To add to the agony, heavy weights were sometimes attached to the victim's ankles. This extra weight made the drop even more violent, ensuring a quicker, more complete dislocation and adding the torment of having your legs feel as though they were being torn from your body as well. When the session was finally over, you would be lowered to the floor, a heap of broken humanity. Your arms would be limp, mangled appendages you could no longer control. The damage was rarely, if ever, reversible. Even if you survived the interrogation and the subsequent execution, you would be a cripple for the rest of your short life. The strappado was a masterclass in cruelty, an understanding of how to use simple mechanics to inflict a pain so total and a disability so permanent that any confession, any name, any lie seemed a small price to pay to make it stop. If the strappado was a punishment of violent, vertical shock, the rack was its horrifying horizontal cousin. It was not a machine of sudden trauma, but of slow, measured, and inexorable deconstruction. Of all the instruments in the torturer's grim orchestra, the rack was the queen. Its purpose was simple and monstrous: to pull the human body apart, joint by joint, until the mind, trapped within the screaming flesh, surrendered its secrets. It was an unassuming device, a large, rectangular wooden bed frame lying low to the ground. There were no spikes, no blades, no fire. There were only rollers at each end, around which thick ropes were wound, and a heavy lever or crank that a torturer would operate. Its genius was its simplicity. Its horror was its patience. You are untied from whatever previous ordeal you have suffered and laid upon this frame. Your ankles are bound to the ropes at one end, your wrists to the other. You are stretched out, helpless, staring up at the damp stone ceiling as the torchlight throws dancing shadows on the walls. The Inquisitor stands over you, his face impassive. The scribe sits nearby, quill poised over parchment, ready to record the truth you are about to provide. The questioning begins, a calm, almost bureaucratic recitation of your alleged crimes. You were seen collecting nightshade by the old mill. Why? You answer truthfully that it was for a poultice to help a neighbor's sick child. The Inquisitor shakes his head slowly. Your answer is unsatisfactory. He gives a quiet nod to the torturer. The torturer grips the lever and gives it the first turn. The ropes groan as they tighten. The slack disappears, and your body is pulled taut. It is not yet agony, but a deep, powerful stretch that runs through every muscle. It is the feeling of being utterly immobilized, your body now a part of the machine. The question is asked again. Who taught you these remedies? Was it the little man in black you met in the woods? You deny it, your voice tight with fear and pain. Another nod. The torturer gives the crank another turn. This time, the pain changes. It is no longer a stretch. It is a sharp, articular fire. You feel it in your shoulders and your hips, a grinding, tearing sensation as your joints are pulled against their natural limits. A soft but audible pop echoes in the small chamber as one of your shoulders gives way. A scream is torn from your throat, but the questioning is relentless. The names. Give us the names of your coven. Another turn of the crank. The pain is no longer localized. It is everywhere, a universe of torment. You can feel your spine elongating, the vertebrae separating one by one. The great joints of your hips and shoulders are now dislocated, your limbs held in place only by stretching. tearing ligaments. It was said that a victim on the rack could be stretched as much as a foot, their body distorted into an impossible, elongated parody of the human form. Whether this is an exaggeration or not, to the person on the rack, it felt true. You were being unmade. This is the point where the mind breaks. The sheer, unrelenting totality of the pain overwhelms every thought, every memory, every shred of will. The only reality is the creak of the crank, the groaning of the frame, and the feeling of your body coming apart at the seams. Survival is no longer the goal. The only goal is to make it stop. And so, the confession begins. A torrent of words, a desperate, babbling agreement to any charge, any fantasy the Inquisitor puts to you. Yes, you consorted with demons. Yes, you caused the hailstorm. Yes, there is a coven. And you name names, anyone whose name floats up from the wreckage of your memory. A neighbor you dislike, a friend, a stranger seen once at the market. It doesn't matter. The names are just currency to purchase an end to the pain. The scribe writes it all down. Your confession is now a legal document. The torturer finally ceases his work, but you are often left on the frame, a broken thing, until the testimony is complete. When they finally release the tension, you are lifted off the rack, your limbs limp and useless, your joints destroyed. You may never walk or use your arms again. But that hardly matters. The rack has done its work. It has produced its truth. After the rack, the strappado, or the relentless agony of the screws, there comes a point where the body has nothing left to give. The confession that follows is not a moment of revelation. It is an act of surrender. It is the final, desperate plea of a mind trapped inside a universe of pain. A mind that has been systematically and intentionally broken down until its only remaining instinct is to find the path of least resistance. It is the moment the Inquisitor has been working towards all along. Imagine the scene. You are lying on the cold stone floor, or perhaps slumped in a chair, your body a landscape of ruin. Your limbs are dislocated, your skin is torn, your mind is a fog of exhaustion and agony. The torturer stands back, his work for the moment done. The Inquisitor steps forward, his voice a calm, almost gentle presence in the aftermath of the storm. He is no longer the aggressor. He is now the path to salvation. The scribe sits quietly, his pen inked, ready to transform your broken words into an official, legal record of your guilt. "My child," the Inquisitor might begin, his tone dripping with false compassion. "The devil has a strong grip on you, but God's mercy is stronger. We do not wish to see you suffer. We only want the truth. Tell us what he made you do. Confess, and this can all be over." The word "over" hangs in the air, a promise of unimaginable relief. It means an end to the pain. It means rest. It might even mean sleep. And in this moment, that promise is more powerful than any fear of death. The fire that awaits you is a distant, abstract horror. The pain you are in right now is immediate and all-consuming. And so, you begin to speak. But the words are not your own. You have already learned, through hours of agonizing questions, exactly what it is they want to hear. The Inquisitor has given you the script, line by painful line. So you recite it back to him. I renounced my baptism, you whisper. your voice a dry rasp. The scribe's quill scratches against the parchment. The inquisitor nods, encouragingly. And then, what did he promise you? Riches, you say, because they have asked about riches before. Power. And the Sabbath, you flew there. Yes, you breathe, the lie catching in your throat. On a broom. After I anointed myself with the fat of an unbaptized child. The detail is grotesque, monstrous. It is not something you could have invented. It is something they suggested to you, something they whispered in your ear during the torment, and now, in your broken state, you repeat it as if it were your own memory. The confession becomes a litany of impossibilities, a tapestry woven from the threads of their accusations and your desperation. You confess to dancing naked in the woods, to kissing the devil's rump, to casting spells that lamed horses and blighted crops. You give them the story they have written for you. It is a performance, and the stakes are your own soul. But the final act of this cruel theater is yet to come. The confession of your own sins is not enough. A witch is never alone. She is part of a coven, and the inquisitor needs more names. Who was there with you? Who else danced for the master? He insists. This is the ultimate betrayal. To save yourself from this moment of pain, you must condemn others to it. You see the faces of your neighbors in your mind's eye. The woman who was kind to you. The man you had a petty argument with. It doesn't matter. You utter their names, one by one. Each name is another soul cast into the fire, another life ruined to purchase a few more moments of peace for yourself. The scribe finishes writing. The inquisitor reads the document back to you. This fantastical narrative of demonic pacts and midnight rituals, now all in your own words. They hand you the quill. Your hand, possibly broken, can barely hold it. You sign your name or make your mark at the bottom of the page. It is done. A wave of profound, hollow relief washes over you. The pain will stop. The questions will end. In the eyes of the church and the law, you are no longer a victim of torture. You are a confessed witch. The document, signed in your own hand, is irrefutable proof. It is not a record of their cruelty. It is the story of your guilt. You have confessed. Through a haze of pain and delirium, you have given them the story they wanted, a tapestry of impossible sins. A profound, hollow relief washes over you. It is over. The torture will stop. But as you lie broken on the stone floor, you see the inquisitor's eyes. The questioning is not finished. In fact, the most terrible part has just begun. He leans closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You have done well to confess your own sins, my child. But a witch does not act alone. The devil does not recruit a single soldier. He builds an army. You were at the Sabbath, you say. Who else was there? Who else danced with you in the woods? You must give us the names. This is the final, most diabolical turn of the screw. Your own confession has damned you, but now you must become the instrument of damnation for others. This was the engine that drove the great European witch hunts from a local panic into a continental epidemic. Witchcraft, in the eyes of the church, was a conspiracy. Therefore, a confession was not considered complete or sincere until the accused implicated their co-conspirators. To refuse to name others was seen as a sign of lingering loyalty to Satan, a final act of defiance that proved your heart was still hard. A last, flickering ember of your will resists. I was alone, you gasp. There were no others. The Inquisitor's brief display of compassion evaporates like smoke. His face becomes a mask of cold fury. Liar, he hisses. The devil still commands your tongue. He gives a sharp, impatient nod to the torturer, who once again takes up his position by the rack or the strappado. The message is brutally clear. Your suffering will not truly end until you sacrifice others upon its altar. The agony returns, sharper and more vicious this time because it is now tied to a specific, terrible demand. Every turn of the crank, every searing pain, is punctuated by the same question, their names. Give us their names. Your mind, already a ruin, desperately searches for an escape. Who do you name, in a final, bitter act of revenge? Name the person who first accused you. Do you name the magistrates themselves, knowing the claim is so outrageous it might be dismissed as madness, or, in the chaos of your torment, do the faces of your friends and family swim before your eyes? Do you name the woman who gave you bread when you were hungry? The midwife who delivered your children, your own sister? It is a choice designed to destroy what little is left of your soul. To protect them is to invite more pain for yourself, a pain that now seems infinite. To save yourself is to become a monster, to become the very source of destruction they accuse you of being, and eventually, under the relentless, crushing weight of the pain, a name is torn from your lips. A choked, sobbing whisper. And once the first name is given, the dam breaks. Others follow, a desperate, incoherent torrent of names, some real, some invented, anything to fill the dreadful silence between the screams. The scribe's pen flies across the parchment, eagerly recording each one. Every name you provide is a new warrant, a new soul to be dragged into this same chamber to undergo this same ordeal. Your forced betrayal is now the seed of a new investigation. You have just supplied the fuel for the next fire. This is how the hysteria was built. It was not a spontaneous madness that swept through villages. It was a chain reaction, deliberately and systematically forged in the torture chamber. One victim, under unbearable duress, would implicate 5 more. Those 5 in turn would be tortured until they implicated 25. It was a pyramid of lies built on a foundation of agony. And you, as you are finally released from the machine, have not only authored your own doom, you have become the author of theirs, too. You have purchased your own peace with the currency of their future suffering. Your confession is complete. The legal document, signed by your own trembling hand, has sealed your fate. But the journey to the gallows or the pyre is not always a direct one. Before the final punishment of death, there was often an intermediate stage, a series of public rituals designed not to break your will, for that was already done, but to display your submission and shame to the entire community. The authorities needed to transform you from a neighbor into a spectacle, a monster to be feared and reviled. One of the most potent instruments for this public theater was the scold's bridle, or the branks. While not exclusively used for witches, it was a punishment overwhelmingly reserved for women, and its purpose made it a perfect tool in the process of dehumanizing an accused witch. It was a punishment for those who spoke out of turn, who gossiped, who nagged, or who were simply deemed too quarrelsome or defiant. In an age when a sharp tongue or a muttered curse could be seen as evidence of witchcraft, the line between a scold and a witch was dangerously thin. The device itself was a masterpiece of cold, brutal ironwork. It was a heavy iron cage or framework that was locked over the head, like a grotesque helmet. The front of this mask featured a plate, often called a bridle bit, that was forced into the mouth and pressed down firmly upon the tongue. Sometimes this bit was flat, designed only to hold the tongue down and make speech impossible. Other times, it was covered in sharp spikes, ensuring that any movement of the tongue or attempt to speak would result in a mouthful of blood and excruciating pain. Imagine the moment this device is brought forth. The cold, heavy weight of it as it is fitted over your head. The metallic clang as the padlock is snapped shut behind your neck. And then the iron bit, cold and tasting of rust, being forced into your mouth. The pressure on your tongue is immense. You cannot speak. You cannot scream. You can barely swallow. Your primary means of expression, your voice, has been utterly silenced. You are, in effect, muzzled like a dangerous animal. The physical torment was only the beginning. The true punishment was the parade. With the bridle locked in place, you would be led by a chain through the streets of your own village. You were forced to walk past the homes of your friends, past the market where you once traded, past the church where you once prayed. Everyone comes out to watch. Children point and laugh. Adults stare with a mixture of pious horror and morbid fascination. You are a living monument to the price of defiance. You cannot speak to defend yourself, to plead, to explain. You can only endure the jeers, the thrown refuse, and the crushing weight of total, public humiliation. The bridle did not just silence the victim, it erased her humanity. The iron mask transformed a familiar face into a monstrous, anonymous effigy of sin. It was a powerful message to the community. This is what happens to a woman who does not know her place, whose words are deemed dangerous. For a woman accused of witchcraft, whose spells were believed to be cast through muttered incantations and curses, the bridle was a particularly symbolic punishment. It was a literal silencing of the source of her supposed evil power. After hours of this parade, you would be returned to your cell, your mouth bleeding, your spirit crushed. You have been shown to your world as a beast, a thing to be caged and silenced, preparing them, and you, for the final act to come. The humiliation did not always end with the iron bridle. The goal of the authorities was to make sin visible, to force the accused to literally wear their transgressions for all to see. In the visual, symbolic world of medieval and early modern Europe, public shaming was a powerful form of social control, a way to turn a human being into a walking sermon against deviance. One of the most vivid examples of this was a punishment known as the drunkard's cloak. This was not a punishment for witchcraft, but its principle was the same. A person found guilty of chronic drunkenness would be forced into a heavy, bottomless wooden barrel, with holes cut out for their head and arms. Trapped inside this clumsy, ridiculous cloak, they were paraded through the town. The weight was exhausting, the confinement was humiliating, and the message was unmistakable. This person had allowed their vice to become their prison. This principle of wearing one's crime was readily adapted for those accused of heresy and witchcraft. Before being led to the stake, a condemned witch would often be dressed in a special garment, a heretic's gown. This was typically a coarse, sackcloth-like robe, painted with lurid symbols. There might be red flames licking up the sides, grotesque devils dancing on the back, or symbols representing the specific crimes to which they had confessed. On their head, they would be forced to wear a tall, pointed paper hat, a mitre, similarly decorated with demonic imagery. This costume was not arbitrary. It was a carefully constructed piece of theater. It visually separated the condemned from the community of the faithful. It transformed them from a human being into an effigy of sin, a living representation of all that was evil and unholy. They were no longer Marjorie the baker or Agnes the widow. They were simply the witch, an object to be reviled. This costuming was often part of a larger ritual of public penance. On a Sunday morning, as the rest of the town gathered for church, the accused would be led to the church steps. Here, in the very heart of the community's spiritual life, they would be made to kneel. Sometimes they held a sign detailing their crimes. The priest might deliver a sermon, using them as a living example of Satan's power, while the congregation was encouraged to jeer, spit, or hurl insults. Imagine the profound psychological weight of this ordeal. To be forced to kneel, a spectacle of shame, before the eyes of everyone you have ever known. To see your children in the crowd, their faces a mixture of confusion and horror. To be symbolically and physically cast out from the community that was once your entire world. It was a spiritual annihilation that preceded the physical one. These rituals were not simply about cruelty. They were about reinforcing the social order. By making a grotesque public example of one person, the authorities sent a clear message to everyone else: this is the boundary. Do not cross it. It was a lesson written not in a book, but on a human body. A lesson that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. After enduring such a ritual, the condemned was fully stripped of their humanity in the eyes of the public. They were no longer a neighbor who had gone astray. They were a monster, and this transformation was essential, for it made the final act of their destruction not only possible, but righteous. The day of the execution arrives. It dawns like any other day, but it is charged with a grim, electric anticipation. For you, it is the last sunrise you will ever see. The rituals of humiliation are over. The confession, extracted through pain and despair, sits as a legal fact. All that remains is the final, public act of your destruction. The door of your cell groans open one last time. You are pulled to your feet, your body a wreck of broken bones and shattered nerves. You are dressed in the rough, painted garment of the condemned, the heretic's gown. As you are led out of the dungeon and into the daylight, the world assaults your senses. After so long in the gloom, the light is a physical blow, blinding and painful. The sounds of the town, the clatter of a cart, the cry of a vendor, the distant laughter of children sound alien, like echoes from a world you no longer belong to. A procession forms around you. It is a slow, deliberate parade of power. There are the guards, their faces stern and impassive. There are the town officials, representing the law of man. And walking beside you, holding a crucifix aloft, are the priests, representing the law of God. Behind you all walks a final, silent figure, often hooded, his purpose unmistakable, the executioner. Your journey begins. It is a slow, measured walk through the streets of your own life. These are the same cobblestones you ran across as a child, the same market square where you bartered for goods, the same homes of the people who are now lining the streets to watch you die. The windows are filled with faces, some jeering, some weeping silently, some staring with a blank, morbid curiosity. The air is thick with the sound of a tolling church bell, a slow, deep knell that marks every step you take towards your own end. This procession is not for your benefit. It is for them. It is the final lesson, the last act in the theater of justice. The priests walking beside you are not silent. They murmur prayers, urging you to make one last, sincere act of contrition. Think of your immortal soul. They plead, God's mercy is infinite, even now. Repent. Their words are a strange mix of comfort and condemnation, a final chance at spiritual salvation offered at the very moment your physical body has been forfeit. Do you listen? Are you numb? Or are you, in these last moments, simply an observer of your own demise? You see the familiar shapes of the rooftops against the sky. You smell the wood smoke from a chimney, the scent of baking bread from a shop you will never enter again. The world, in its simple, everyday beauty, has never seemed so precious and so distant. You are being walked out of your own life, step by agonizing step. Finally, you arrive. Whether it is a stark gallows silhouetted on a hill outside of town, or a monstrous pyre of stacked wood in the central square, the instrument of your death dominates the landscape. The procession halts. The crowd, which had been a chaotic chorus of jeers and whispers, falls into a deep, expectant hush. An official steps forward and, in a loud, clear voice, reads your sentence to the assembled public, listing your crimes, your confession, and your fate. This is the final severing. The last thread connecting you to the world of the living is about to be cut. The journey is over. Not every conviction ended in the smoke of the pyre or the snap of a rope. For some, particularly in the earlier stages of the hunts, or in cases where the evidence was considered less definitive, the sentence was not death, but exile. To the modern ear, banishment sounds like a reprieve, an act of mercy compared to the brutal finality of execution. But in the tightly knit, interdependent world of the 16th and 17th centuries, banishment was often just a slower, colder, and lonelier form of a death sentence. The verdict is read in the town square. You are guilty, but you are not to be burned. Instead, you are to be cast out. You are given a set amount of time, perhaps until sundown, or for 3 days to leave the territory of the town and never return. If you are ever seen within its boundaries again, you will be killed on sight. No questions asked. At first, a desperate, dizzying wave of relief might wash over you. You are alive. You have been spared. But as you are released and you stumble back towards your home, the true meaning of the sentence begins to sink in. Your home is no longer yours. The property of a convicted witch was almost always confiscated by the local authorities, a lucrative side benefit that helped fuel the zeal of the prosecutors. You walk into the house you were born in, or the home you built with your husband, and you find it hollowed out, already picked over. You are allowed to take nothing but the clothes on your back. You have been erased. Your name has been struck from the community's register. The social fabric that made up your entire existence has been violently torn away. To be banished was to lose everything that gave life meaning and structure. You have no home. You have no craft or trade, for your tools have been taken. You have no network of support. Your friends are forbidden from helping you, on pain of being accused themselves. Your family, if they are not also cast out, must shun you to survive. To be seen with you, to give you a piece of bread, is to be tainted by your crime. So you begin to walk. You leave the familiar streets of your town and set out on a dusty, unfamiliar road. Where do you go? Every direction leads to another town where you are a stranger, a beggar with no papers, no references, and no past. And rumors traveled fast. The story of your conviction might even arrive before you do. To be a stranger on the road in this era was to be profoundly vulnerable. There were no social safety nets, no shelters, no charities for the likes of you. You were at the mercy of bandits, of harsh weather, of starvation. Every town you approached would see you as a potential threat, a drain on their resources, and drive you away. You were forced to live in the wild spaces between communities in the forests and the moors, sleeping in ditches, foraging for berries and roots like an animal. The psychological toll was immense. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant, gnawing ache. You were adrift in a world that had utterly rejected you. Death, when it came, would not be a public spectacle. It would be a quiet, anonymous affair. You might succumb to starvation, to a winter freeze in a makeshift shelter, or to a sickness with no one to offer a cup of water or a word of comfort. Your body would be found days or weeks later by a traveling merchant, your unburied bones a silent testament to a punishment that offered the illusion of life, but delivered only a slow and solitary death. While the image of the witch burning at the stake is seared into our collective imagination, this was a fate largely confined to continental Europe. Across the Channel in England, and later in its American colonies, the final punishment for witchcraft took a different, though no less grim, form. Here, the instrument of death was not fire, but the rope. The end was not burning, but hanging. This difference was rooted in law. In countries like Germany and France, witchcraft was prosecuted primarily as heresy, a crime against God, to be purified by fire. In England, under laws like the Witchcraft Act of 1604, witchcraft was classified as a felony, a crime against the king and the state. As such, it was punished in the same manner as other serious secular crimes like murder or theft. The sentence was death by hanging. The gallows was a stark and common sight in the English landscape, a permanent wooden skeleton silhouetted on a hilltop just outside of town. This was where justice was seen to be done, and the method of hanging in this era was not the swift, clinical process we might imagine. There was no long drop designed to snap the neck and cause instant death. This was the age of the short drop. The condemned would be made to stand on a ladder, or on a cart with a rope around their neck, the other end thrown over the gallows beam. When the moment came, the ladder would be turned over, or the cart would be pulled away, leaving the person to dangle. The fall was only a foot or two, not nearly enough to generate the force required to break the neck. Instead, death came slowly, from strangulation and asphyxia. The full weight of the body, pulling against the noose, would crush the windpipe and cut off the carotid arteries, starving the brain of air and blood. It was an agonizing, terrifying, and intensely private struggle, performed in full public view. The process could take several minutes. The body would twitch and convulse in a grotesque final dance. The face would turn purple, the eyes bulge from their sockets, the tongue swell and protrude. It was a grim, suffocating end. Nowhere is this method more famously associated with witchcraft than in the small, devout, and terrified village of Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692. Here, a storm of accusations, born from a mixture of social tension, adolescent hysteria, and rigid Puritan theology, led to the execution of 20 people. 19 of them were hanged. Imagine the scene at Gallows Hill in Salem. Bridget Bishop, the first to be executed, a tavern keeper known for her colorful dress and independent spirit, is led to the scaffold. Then came the respected and elderly Rebecca Nurse, a devout churchgoer whose conviction shocked the community. There was Reverend George Burroughs, a former minister, so physically strong his accusers claimed his strength must be of the devil. At his execution, he recited the Lord's Prayer from start to finish without a single stumble, an act believed to be impossible for a witch. A final, powerful assertion of innocence that deeply unsettled the watching crowd. For each of them, the end was the same. The cart pulled away, the body dropped, and the slow, choking agony began. After death, their bodies were cut down and given no dignity. They were denied a Christian burial in the hallowed ground of the churchyard. Instead, they were disposed of unceremoniously, their bodies cast into a shallow, unmarked crevice among the rocks on that same barren hill. It was a final act of excommunication, a declaration that they were unfit to lie amongst the community of the faithful, even in death. Hanging was the cold, legal, and final answer of the English and colonial justice system. It lacked the fiery, theological symbolism of the pyre, but it was no less cruel. Its horror was in its slow, deliberate suffocation, a public and undeniable extinguishing of a life deemed too dangerous to continue. Amidst the sorrowful litany of the 19 who were hanged at Salem, one death stands alone, singular in its method and horrifying in its testimony. It was a death born not from a conviction, but from a stubborn, silent, and heroic refusal to participate in the court's madness. This is the story of Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer, and the ancient, brutal punishment known as peine forte et dure, pressing to death. Giles Corey was a man known for his contentious nature. He was a stubborn and often litigious farmer, a tough old man who had lived a long and complicated life. When the accusations began to fly, his own devout wife, Martha, was among the first to be accused. Giles, perhaps naively, even testified against her initially. But as the hysteria grew, the accusing fingers eventually turned on him as well. He was arrested and brought before the magistrates. But when he stood before the court, Giles Corey did something that brought the entire legal machine to a grinding halt. He refused to enter a plea to the charge of witchcraft. He would not say guilty, nor would he say not guilty. He stood mute. Under the English common law that governed the colony, this was a critical problem. A person could not be tried for a felony unless they had first entered a plea. Without that plea, there could be no trial, no conviction, and no sentence. Giles Corey, in his stubborn silence, had found a way to deny the court its power over him, Why did he do it? By this point, he had seen the futility of the trials. To plead not guilty was to be tried and almost certainly convicted, as had happened to so many others. A conviction for witchcraft, a felony, meant that his property and lands would be seized by the state, leaving his family and heirs with nothing. By refusing to plead, he could not be convicted. He would die, but he would die without a conviction, ensuring his farm and estate would legally pass to his sons-in-law. It was his final, agonizingly defiant act of will, a way to protect his legacy from the court he no longer recognized as just. But the law had an ancient and terrible answer for those who stood mute. It was called peine forte et dure, a French term meaning hard and forceful punishment. It was not a sentence for a crime, but a form of torture, a procedure designed to force a plea from the silent. On September 17th, 1692, Giles Corey was taken to an open field next to the Salem jail. He was stripped of his clothes, and a heavy wooden board was laid across his body. Then, the sheriff, George Corwin, ordered that heavy stones and rocks be brought from the field's walls. One by one, they were placed upon the board, gradually increasing the weight on the old man's chest. The process was deliberately slow, an agony measured in hours and then days. After each stone was added, the sheriff would lean down and demand his plea. Giles Corey, will you now plead to the charge? The weight mounted. His breathing became shallow. His ribs groaned under the strain. But Giles Corey refused to utter the words that would grant the court its authority. Instead, according to the legend that has echoed down through the centuries, he had only one defiant response. Through gritted teeth and labored breaths, he would gasp, "More weight." It was an act of almost superhuman defiance. He was not just enduring the pain. He was mocking it, demanding more, choosing the slow, crushing death over submission to a corrupt process. For 2 days, he lay there as the stones piled higher. Finally, on September 19th, his body gave out. The immense weight had crushed his chest, forcing his tongue from his mouth. He died, but he died without plea, and therefore without conviction. His death was a spectacle of such profound brutality that it is often seen as a turning point in the Salem tragedy, a moment where the cruelty of the proceedings became too stark for the community to ignore. While others died for the crimes they were accused of, Giles Corey died for his silence. He was not hanged as a witch. He was pressed to death as a man who refused to speak in a world that demanded lies. In the grim hierarchy of death that defined the witch trials, not all ends were created equal. While the common man or woman faced the slow degradation of the noose or the purifying agony of the flame, a different fate was sometimes, on rare occasions, reserved for the accused of noble blood or high social standing. This was the path of the sword or the axe. This was the punishment of beheading. In the stratified world of the 16th and 17th centuries, beheading was often considered a merciful or noble death. Its perceived mercy lay in its speed. In theory, a single, swift blow from a heavy, sharp blade would sever the head from the body, causing an instantaneous and painless end. Compared to the minutes of choking on the gallows or the slow roasting on the pyre, it was seen as a quick release. It was also a death of honor, at least relatively. The sword was the weapon of the aristocracy, the symbol of the warrior class. To be killed by a blade carried none of the degrading, common criminal associations of the hangman's rope. Furthermore, it left the body largely intact, allowing the family to claim the corpse for a proper Christian burial, a matter of immense spiritual importance. To grant an accused witch a beheading was a nod to their worldly status, a concession to their powerful family that while their life was forfeit, their honor would not be entirely trampled in the process. But this ideal of a clean, honorable death was a fragile one, resting entirely on the skill, strength, and sobriety of a single individual, the executioner. In an age without the mechanical precision of the guillotine, the executioner's work was a gruesome and demanding craft. A moment's hesitation, a poorly aimed strike, or a dull blade could transform a scene of supposed mercy into a horrific spectacle of butchery. Imagine the scene: the condemned kneels at the block, their head bowed, their neck exposed. The crowd falls into a tense, breathless silence. The executioner, often a massive figure clad in black, lifts a great two-handed sword. He takes his aim and swings, but instead of a clean cut, the blade strikes too high, shattering the back of the skull, or too low, biting deep into the shoulder. The victim, still alive, would cry out in a new, unimaginable agony. It could take 2, 3, or even more hacking blows to finally sever the head, turning the scaffold into a blood-soaked abattoir. This was the terrible gamble of the merciful sword. This fate was exceptionally rare for accused witches, the vast majority of whom were poor commoners. But in the sprawling witch hunts of the Holy Roman Empire, in places like Bamberg and Würzburg, the hysteria occasionally consumed members of the elite mayors, councilmen, and noblewomen. In these instances, to avoid the political fallout of publicly burning a well-regarded aristocrat, the authorities might grant the privilege of a death by the sword. Even when performed perfectly, it was a profound and visceral display of state power. The flash of the blade in the sun, the dull thud of the head falling into a basket of sawdust, and the final, chilling moment when the executioner holds the severed head aloft for the crowd to see, its eyes still open, its expression frozen in the last instant of life. It was a stark and undeniable confirmation that no one, no matter their station, was above the law, or above the reach of the witch hunter's accusations. Beheading was a strange paradox, a punishment that conferred a measure of honor while simultaneously demonstrating the absolute, brutal power of those who had ordered it. This is the image that history cannot forget, the one that has haunted the Western imagination for centuries. It is the ultimate symbol of the witch hunts, the fiery apotheosis of the fear and fanaticism that gripped so much of Europe. While England had its gallows, the great territories of the Holy Roman Empire, what is now Germany, Austria, and parts of France and Switzerland made the pyre their chosen instrument. For them, witchcraft was not merely a felony, it was the ultimate heresy, a spiritual stain upon the fabric of Christendom. And such a stain, they believed, could only be cleansed by the purifying power of fire. The execution was a meticulously planned public holiday of horror. In the center of the town square, or just outside the city walls, the preparations would begin days in advance. A thick, sturdy wooden stake, a tree trunk stripped of its branches, would be driven deep into the earth. Around it, a master carpenter and his assistants would construct a platform and then, with dreadful precision, begin to build the pyre. They stacked wood in a careful, deliberate pattern, creating a hollow space around the stake. They would use dry, seasoned hardwood for the base to create a hot, long-lasting fire, but they would often pile bundles of greener, damper wood or wet straw on the outer layers. This was a calculated cruelty. The damp wood would not burn cleanly. It would smolder, producing thick, acrid clouds of smoke, ensuring that the death would be a slow, suffocating affair long before the flames brought their own kind of agony. On the day of the execution, after the final procession, you are led to this monstrous wooden altar. You are forced onto the platform and chained securely to the stake. Your painted heretic's gown is dry and flammable. As you stand there, bound and helpless, you have a final, panoramic view of the world you are leaving. You see the entire town gathered to watch you die. You see the faces of the priests, the magistrates, your accusers, and the silent, anonymous crowd. A priest would often give a final, lengthy sermon, his voice ringing across the square, detailing your sins and exhorting the crowd to learn from your terrible example. And then the moment comes. A man with a torch steps forward. He does not light the great logs at the bottom. He lights the kindling at the base of the pyre, or perhaps the bundles of damp straw. A thin tendril of smoke rises, then another. The smoke is the first tormentor. It curls into the air, thick and greasy, carrying the smell of burning pitch and damp wood. It stings your eyes, making them stream with tears. It catches in your throat, and your first breath of it sends you into a fit of desperate, racking coughs. The smoke grows thicker, becoming a dense, choking cloud that envelops you. It blots out the sky, the crowd, everything. Your world shrinks to this small circle of wood and smoke. You can no longer see your executioners, but you can hear them. You can hear the crackle of the flames as they finally catch hold, and you can hear the roar of the crowd, a sound that is both a cheer and a howl. Panic, primal and absolute, sets in. Every instinct in your body screams at you to run, to escape, but the chains hold you fast. The air becomes unbreathable, a toxic soup that offers no relief. Your lungs burn. Your head spins from the lack of oxygen. Many victims died at this point, succumbing to asphyxiation and carbon monoxide poisoning long before the flames reached them. This was considered the merciful death at the stake. But if you survived the smoke, the fire was waiting. You feel its heat first, a blistering wave that cooks the air around you. It scorches your skin, shrivels your hair, and cracks your lips. And then the first tongues of flame lick at your feet. The pain is unlike anything else, a sharp, searing, all-consuming agony that obliterates thought. It climbs your legs, devouring the flammable gown, then your flesh. The myth that a victim would be rendered senseless by the smoke before the worst of the burning is just that, a myth. For many, they were conscious for the horror. They were alive as the fire consumed them. It was a death that unfolded over agonizing minutes, a complete and total destruction of the body, a reduction to ash and memory, performed as a holy act. It was the ultimate expression of the witch-hunting mania, a final, fiery solution to a problem born of fear, superstition, and a terrifying certainty in the righteousness of their own cruelty. The spectacle is over. The crowd, having witnessed the final, brutal act of justice, disperses, returning to their homes and their ordinary lives, the grim excitement of the day already beginning to fade. The executioner cleans his tools. The square, once filled with a roar, falls quiet. But for the family of the condemned, the suffering has just begun. The punishment for witchcraft did not end with the victim's last breath. It was a wave of destruction that rippled outwards, devastating those left behind. First, there was the matter of the body. There would be no proper funeral, no solemn procession to the churchyard. A convicted witch was deemed to have died in a state of mortal sin, excommunicated from God and community. They were denied a burial in consecrated ground. The ashes from the pyre were often collected and unceremoniously scattered into a nearby river, a final act of dispersal to ensure no relic could be gathered by a sympathetic friend or family member. The bodies of the hanged were cut down and thrown into a common, unmarked felon's pit, or buried in a shallow grave near the gallows itself. This was a posthumous damnation, a final declaration that you did not belong, even in death. Then came the ruin of the living. Upon a conviction for witchcraft, the estate of the condemned, their home, their land, their tools, their savings, every worldly possession they had, was forfeit. It was seized by the local secular or religious authorities. This created a dark and powerful financial incentive that underpinned many of the most zealous hunts. For a local lord, a prince bishop, or a town council, every conviction was a source of revenue. This grim reality meant that a person of even modest wealth was a more tempting target than a penniless beggar. In a final, cruel twist of bureaucratic sadism, the victim's own estate was often made to pay for the costs of their own persecution. The family, already stripped of their loved one and their home, would be presented with a bill. It was a chillingly detailed account of their own destruction, a fee for the torturer's time, a charge for the wood that fueled the pyre, the rope for the gallows, the executioner's wage, the scribe's ink, and even for the meager bread and water the prisoner was given in their cell. The family was forced to finance the very machine that had destroyed them, adding a profound and unforgettable insult to their injury. For the children and spouse who survived, life was irrevocably poisoned. They carried the stigma of being the kin of a witch, their blood considered tainted. They were ostracized, shunned by the very community that once supported them. No one would hire them. No one would trade with them. The children of witches often became beggars, vagrants, or were forced to flee their hometowns, changing their names to escape the long, dark shadow of their parents' fate. The memory of the person was also systematically erased or rewritten. Their name might be struck from official town and church records or amended with the title of witch. Their story, passed down through generations, was no longer their own. It was a cautionary tale, a piece of dark folklore told to frightened children. Their character was blackened, their life reduced to a monstrous caricature to justify the manner of their death. They were not just killed, they were unpersoned. The true aftermath of the witch trials was not just the silence of the execution ground, it was the echoing silence in the empty homes, the poverty of the orphan children, and the quiet, enduring sorrow of a legacy deliberately turned to ash. In the vast and bloody history of the witch hunts, no single episode looms larger in the American consciousness than the tragedy that unfolded in the small, isolated Puritan outpost of Salem Village, Massachusetts. The Salem witch trials were not the largest, nor the longest, nor even the most brutal of the hunts. But their story endures as a chilling case study in how a unique combination of religious fervor, social anxiety, and personal vendettas could coalesce into a perfect storm of deadly hysteria. To understand Salem, you have to understand the world of the Puritans. They had journeyed across an ocean to build a city upon a hill, a model Christian society in the vast, untamed wilderness of the New World. Theirs was a world of rigid piety and profound anxiety. They saw themselves as God's chosen people, living on the front lines of a cosmic battle. The dark, forbidding forest that surrounded their small, claustrophobic villages was not just a physical wilderness. It was a spiritual one, the earthly domain of the devil, populated by his agents, both the Native Americans they feared and, as they would soon come to believe, witches within their own ranks. Life in Salem Village in 1692 was hard. A recent smallpox epidemic, the constant threat of attack from neighboring Native American tribes, and the bitter cold of New England winters created a pervasive sense of fragility and fear. Adding to this was a bitter, long-standing feud within the village itself. The community was deeply divided over property disputes and, most pointedly, over its controversial minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. The village was a powder keg of resentment and anxiety, waiting for a spark. That spark came from within the minister's own home. In the bleak winter of early 1692, Reverend Parris's 9-year-old daughter, Betty, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, began to exhibit strange and terrifying behaviors. They would scream, throw things, contort their bodies into unnatural positions, and complain of being pricked and bitten by invisible forces. Soon, other young women in the village began to show the same symptoms. The local doctor, unable to find any physical cause, made a diagnosis that was both medical and theological. The girls were bewitched. The question then became, by whom? Pressured by magistrates, the afflicted girls began to name names. Their accusations were a strange and toxic cocktail of folk magic and Puritan theology. They spoke of spectral shapes, of shadowy figures tormenting them in their sleep. The first 3 women they accused fit the classic profile of the suspected witch. There was Tituba, Reverend Parris's enslaved servant from the Caribbean, whose folk stories had likely captivated the girls' imaginations. There was Sarah Good, a destitute and homeless beggar. And there was Sarah Osborne, an elderly, quarrelsome woman who had angered her neighbors over an inheritance dispute. They were all social outcasts, easy targets for community looking for someone to blame. But what began with the marginalized did not end there. Under the pressure of the newly established court, the afflicted girls grew bolder, their accusations more numerous and more shocking. They began to point their fingers at respectable, church-going members of the community. The trials became a public spectacle, the courtroom a stage for the girls' dramatic fits and torments. When a respected matriarch like Rebecca Nurse stood accused, the girls would collapse on the floor, screaming that her specter was attacking them. This spectral evidence, the claim that a witch's invisible spirit could travel and do harm, was accepted by the court as valid testimony. It was a form of evidence that was impossible to disprove. How could you prove that your spirit hadn't been tormenting someone? The accused were trapped. To maintain their innocence was to be condemned by the court. The only way to save one's life was to confess to being a witch and, crucially, to name others. This devil's bargain created a chain reaction of accusations that spiraled out of control. Neighbor turned against neighbor, using the panic as a convenient weapon to settle old scores. By the time the madness subsided in late 1692, 19 men and women had been hanged on Gallows Hill. Several others had died in the squalid prisons. And one old man, Giles Corey, had been crushed to death under heavy stones. Salem was not a story of monsters. It was a story of people of fear, division, and a terrifying certainty that they were doing God's work, even as they tore their own community apart. If the Salem trials represent a story of localized social hysteria, the witch hunts that ravaged the Prince-Bishopric of Bamberg in Germany represent something far more terrifying: the industrialization of persecution. This was not a case of bottom-up panic among villagers. This was a top-down, state-sponsored, and meticulously organized campaign of extermination, driven by a ruler who saw witch hunting as his sacred duty and a lucrative enterprise. The architect of this horror was Prince Bishop Gottfried Johann Georg II von Aschhausen, and later his successor, von Dornheim, the so-called witch bishop. In the early 1600s, this region of Germany was reeling from years of war, political strife, and crop failures. A devastating frost in 1626, which destroyed the year's harvest, provided the final catalyst. In a world desperate for answers, the Prince Bishop offered a simple one: the disaster was not the fault of the weather, but the work of a vast conspiracy of witches, operating from within Bamberg itself. What followed was not a series of haphazard trials, but the creation of a ruthlessly efficient machine of death. A special witch-hunting committee was formed, composed of zealous lawyers and theologians. More chillingly, a special prison was constructed specifically for this purpose, a Malefice house, or witch house. This was not just a jail. It was a purpose-built factory for producing confessions. It contained cells for the accused, but its centerpiece was a series of fully equipped torture chambers, staffed by professional torturers who were paid by the head. The Bamberg trials followed a terrifyingly predictable script. An accusation was made. The accused, regardless of their age, gender, or social standing, was arrested and brought to the Malefice house. Here, they were systematically subjected to every instrument of pain in the torturer's arsenal. The strappado, the leg screws, thumb screws, whipping, and the application of burning sulfur were all used with merciless proficiency. The goal was not to discover the truth, but to force a confession that fit a pre-written narrative. This narrative was always the same. The accused had to confess to having renounced God, made a pact with the devil, attended a witch's sabbath, and performed acts of magical harm, or maleficium. But crucially, they had to name their accomplices. The records from the Bamberg trials show how, under extreme torture, one victim would name 5, 10, or even 20 others. Each new name was a new arrest warrant, feeding more victims into the insatiable machine of the Malefice house. Unlike in Salem, where the accusations started with social outcasts, the Bamberg witch hunt quickly consumed the very elite of the city. The terror was indiscriminate. Respected town councilors, wealthy merchants, and even the city's mayor, Johannes Junius, were arrested, tortured, and forced to confess. The letter Junius smuggled to his daughter from his cell just before his execution is one of the most harrowing documents from the entire era. In it, he details the unbearable torture that forced him to invent a story of his own guilt. "Innocent I came into prison," he wrote. "Innocent I must die. For whoever is put into the witch prison must become a witch or be tortured until he invents something out of his head." The economic motive was undeniable. Upon conviction, the entire property of the accused was confiscated by the Prince Bishop's administration. The trials were immensely profitable. The system paid for itself, with the victims' own wealth funding the salaries of their torturers and executioners. It was a self-perpetuating cycle of accusation, torture, confiscation, and execution. Between roughly 1626 and 1632, this state-run industry of death consumed an estimated 600 to 900 lives in Bamberg and the surrounding areas. The fires burned so often that the citizens became numb to the smell of burning flesh. The Bamberg witch trials stand as a testament to the horror that unfolds when institutional power, religious zealotry, and financial greed combine to create a system where innocence is not a defense, but an obstacle to be brutally overcome. While the great witch hunts of Germany were known for their systematic, bureaucratic cruelty, the hunts in Scotland were fueled by a different kind of fire. They were born from a culture of grim Calvinist piety, deep-seated political paranoia, and a fervent, personal belief in the devil's direct intervention in human affairs, a belief championed by the king himself. The Scottish hunts were not just legal proceedings. They were national crusades, characterized by their explosive ferocity and their reliance on confessions extracted through relentless psychological torment. The story of the Scottish witch craze begins not in a remote village, but with a royal marriage and a storm at sea. In 1589, King James VI of Scotland, who would later become King James I of England, sailed to Denmark to marry his bride, Princess Anne. Their return journey was racked by terrible storms, which nearly sank their fleet. Back in Denmark, James was exposed to the ongoing witch trials there, and he became utterly convinced that the storms were not a natural phenomenon, but a deliberate act of high treason orchestrated by a conspiracy of Scottish witches in league with the devil. This royal conviction ignited the first of Scotland's great national panics, the North Berwick witch trials. A group of men and women from the area around North Berwick were arrested and accused of meeting with the devil himself, raising the storms to kill the king, and engaging in other acts of treasonous magic. The ensuing trials set the pattern for decades of Scottish witch hunting. The primary tool was not the rack or the pyre, but waking the witch, sleep deprivation, combined with the use of witch prickers to find the devil's mark. Under days of sleepless torment, a woman named Agnes Sampson confessed to a fantastical plot, providing the king with all the confirmation he needed. King James VI was not a passive observer. He was an active participant and the chief ideologue of the hunts. He personally supervised the interrogations, delighting in theological debates with the accused. In 1597, he authored his own treatise on the subject, a book called Demonology. In it, he laid out his absolute belief in the reality of witchcraft and argued for the necessity of its prosecution. As a book written by a king, Demonology carried immense authority and served to legitimize and inflame the persecution across his kingdom. What made the Scottish hunts so particularly brutal was the legal system itself. Unlike in England, Scottish law allowed for torture to be used to extract a confession. Local parish ministers and lay elders, known as the Kirk Session, held immense power and could initiate investigations with little oversight. A mere rumor or a neighborly dispute could be enough to land someone in the local thief's hole, where they would be subjected to relentless waking, pricking, and psychological pressure until they broke. The result was a series of intense, nationwide panics that erupted periodically for over a century, peaking in the Great Scottish Witch Hunt of 1661 to 62. The confessions were often remarkably detailed, full of vivid accounts of Sabbaths, demonic pacts, and shape-shifting, a testament to the power of sleep-deprived minds to weave together the folklore and religious dogma they had been fed. The number of executions in Scotland was staggering for its relatively small population. While the exact number is debated, it is estimated that between 1,500 and 4,000 people, the vast majority of them women, were executed as witches. It was one of the most intense and deadly witch hunts in all of Europe, a dark legacy born from a king's paranoia, a rigid and fearful theology, and a legal system that made it terrifyingly easy to turn a whisper into a death sentence. After walking through these dark chambers of history, after hearing the creak of the rack and smelling the smoke from the pyre, the question that hangs in the quiet air is simply, why? Why did this happen? It is easy to label our ancestors as monstrous or ignorant, but the truth is far more complex and far more unsettling. The great witch hunts were not merely a product of superstition, they were a complex social engine, fueled by the deepest anxieties of the human heart. At its core, the witch was a scapegoat. In an age of profound uncertainty, when life was dictated by the seemingly random whims of plague, famine, and war, people craved a sense of control, an explanation for their suffering. It was far more comforting to believe that a failed harvest was the result of a neighbor's curse than to accept the terrifying reality that you could do everything right and still starve. It was easier to blame a midwife's spell for a child's death than to confront the heartbreaking fragility of life itself. The witch became the face of chaos, a single, identifiable source for all of life's random cruelties. By finding and destroying her, the community felt it was restoring order, fighting back against the darkness, and regaining control. And it is no accident that this scapegoat was, overwhelmingly, a woman. The societies that burned witches were deeply, institutionally misogynistic. Church doctrine and secular law both portrayed women as the weaker vessel, more carnal, more emotional, and therefore more easily seduced by the devil. A woman who is too independent, too outspoken, too knowledgeable, or simply too old and living outside the protective control of a man, was an anomaly. She was a deviation from the patriarchal norm, and in a world obsessed with order, any deviation was inherently suspect. The witch hunt was, in many ways, a brutal reassertion of that patriarchal order. Finally, we cannot ignore the colder, more cynical motives. Confiscating the property of a convicted witch was immensely profitable. A witch hunt could be used by a ruler to eliminate political rivals, or by neighbors to settle old scores over land. The witch was a convenient invention, a blank slate onto which an entire society could project its fears, its fear of God, its fear of chaos, and its deep, simmering fear of women. So who were these women? Really, the popular image is of a haggard old crone, muttering to herself by a fire. And while it is true that many victims were elderly widows, the most socially and economically vulnerable members of any community, the profile of the accused was often far more specific and far more threatening to the established order. Very often, the woman accused of witchcraft was a woman who held a quiet, informal kind of power. Consider the midwife. In an age before a formal medical profession, The midwife was a figure of immense importance and authority in the village. She was the keeper of generational knowledge about herbal remedies, childbirth, and the cycles of life and death. She was present at the most sacred and terrifying moments in a family's life. Her hands were the first to hold a newborn, and often the last to comfort the dying. This gave her a unique form of power, one that existed outside the formal, male-dominated structures of the church and the state. But this power was a double-edged sword. When a birth went well, she was hailed. But when a baby was stillborn, or a mother died in labor, tragically common occurrences, suspicion could easily fall upon the midwife. Did her knowledge fail, or was it used for a more sinister purpose? Was the herbal remedy she provided a cure, or a curse? The midwife, with her secret knowledge of the female body and the natural world, was an easy target for a male clergy that sought to control all matters of life and death. The same was true for any woman who lived with a degree of independence. A widow who inherited her husband's property and managed it successfully. A single woman who earned her own living selling goods at the market. An herbalist whose poultices were more effective than the doctor's bleedings. These women represented a challenge to the natural order. Their knowledge was not learned from books or sanctioned by the university. Their authority did not come from a husband or a priest. Their power was their own. And in the world of the witch hunter, unsanctioned female power was, by its very definition, suspect. It was a power that must have come from the only other possible source, the devil. No fire burns forever. The great European witch hunts, which had raged for nearly 3 centuries, did not end in a single dramatic moment. Instead, the flames slowly died down, starved of the social, legal, and intellectual oxygen they needed to survive. The long night of the burning times ended not with a bang, but with a gradual, dawning light of reason. This new light was the Enlightenment, an intellectual revolution in the late 17th and 18th centuries that fundamentally changed how people understood the world. Philosophers and scientists began to champion skepticism, empirical evidence, and natural law. They argued that the universe was not a chaotic stage for supernatural war, but an orderly system governed by predictable forces. A storm was a meteorological event, not a demonic assault. A sickness was caused by germs or imbalances in the body, not a witch's curse. This new, scientific worldview began to dismantle the very foundation of the witch-hunting ideology. If the world could be explained by natural causes, there was no need to invent supernatural ones. This intellectual shift had a profound effect on the legal system. The educated elite, the judges, lawyers, and magistrates who presided over the trials began to view the proceedings with a new skepticism. They started to question the reliability of evidence obtained through torture, recognizing that a person in agony will say anything to make the pain stop. The flimsy nature of spectral evidence, the testimony of accusers about invisible spirits, was exposed as unverifiable and unjust. Courts began to demand a higher standard of proof, one that required tangible evidence, not the frantic accusations of terrified girls. At the same time, the power of the state was becoming more centralized. The fragmented, localized justice systems that allowed local panics to flare up were slowly replaced by more stable, national legal codes. A centralized government was less prone to being swayed by a single village's anxieties. The era of the freelance witch hunter and the zealous local inquisitor was drawing to a close. The trials became more expensive, more bureaucratic, and less likely to produce the profitable convictions of the past. The witch hunt, once a self-funding enterprise, became too inefficient for the modern state. The flames faded, not because humanity had suddenly become more enlightened and kind, but because the very machinery of the hunt had rusted, clogged, and finally broken down. The pyres are cold. The gallows have rotted into dust. It is tempting to look back on the witch hunts as a bizarre and distant chapter of history, a relic of a superstitious past we have long outgrown. But to do so is to miss the most unsettling lesson of all. The stage has changed. The costumes are different. But the dark psychology that fueled the hunts is a timeless and deeply human phenomenon. The witch may be gone, but the hunt remains. The witch hunt was never truly about the devil. It was about the terrifyingly human need for a scapegoat in times of fear and uncertainty. It was about the creation of an other, an enemy, real or imagined, onto whom a community can project its anxieties and purge its own sins. It is a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history, with different targets but the same brutal logic. We saw it in the Red Scare of the 20th century, where accusations stood in for evidence and lives were ruined by lists of names. We see it in modern political discourse, where opponents are not just disagreed with, but demonized, stripped of their humanity, and labeled as existential threats. We see the hunt in the swift and merciless cycles of online shaming, where a digital mob can form in minutes, convict a person based on a rumor or a single out-of-context statement, and destroy their reputation and livelihood before any real facts can emerge. The tools have changed from the thumbscrew to the tweet, from the pyre to the cancellation, but the impulse is the same: to identify, isolate, and destroy those who deviate from the accepted norm. The enduring lesson of the witch trials is a quiet and chilling warning about the dangers of absolute certainty, especially a certainty born of fear. It teaches us how fragile reason can be in the face of mass hysteria, and how quickly the machinery of justice, whether in a 17th century courtroom or a 21st century social media platform, can be twisted into an instrument of persecution. To remember the victims of the witch hunts is not just to mourn the past. It is to hold up a mirror to the present, to recognize the familiar shadows of blame, fear, and othering in our own world. And it is to commit ourselves to quenching those small fires of intolerance before they are ever allowed to grow into a blaze. The story is over now. The echoes of the screams have faded. The last of the embers has turned to cold, gray ash. Imagine, if you will, a small town square somewhere in the heart of Europe, late on a Tuesday night. The moon is out, casting a soft, gentle light on the cobblestones. The shops are all closed, their windows dark. The only sound is the quiet hum of a distant car and the rustle of leaves in the trees that line the square. The stones under your feet are the same stones that were there 300, 400 years ago. They are the same stones that felt the heat from the pyre, the same stones that were splattered with rain and tears. But tonight, they are just stones, cool, quiet, and still. They hold the memory, but they do not hold the pain. The past is here, but it is asleep. We carry these stories with us, these heavy histories of what we have done to one another. They are grim, and they are dark, and it is right to feel the weight of them. They serve as a constant, quiet reminder of how easily fear can be twisted into hatred, and how quickly certainty can become a weapon. But their weight is also a sign that we have moved on. The world that built the pyres is gone. The laws that allowed for such cruelty have been unwritten. The darkness is a part of our story, a deep and terrible chapter. But it is not the end of the book. The weight we feel is not a burden to crush us, but an anchor, a reminder to be more thoughtful, more compassionate, and more humble in the face of the unknown. And now, it is time to set that weight down. It is time to let these grim tales dissolve into the quiet of the night. They are just stories now. They have no power here, in the safety and the comfort of your room. Let the images fade. Let the names of the torturers and the victims alike drift away, back into the pages of the history books where they belong. You are safe. You are warm. And you are far, far away from that world of shadow and flame. There are no accusations here. There are no interrogations. There is only the softness of your bed, the gentle weight of your blanket, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Let each breath be a quiet wave, washing these old sorrows further and further away from you, out into a vast and silent ocean of sleep. So sleep now. The fires have long gone out. The accusations have all fallen silent. You are safe in the quiet of your own space, in the peace of this moment. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, for walking through this difficult history. If this story has helped you find a place of stillness, a place where your own thoughts can quiet down, then I am grateful. Rest now. Let go of the day. Let go of it all. And drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night.